Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So today's video, we're getting into the super fun stuff and talking all about your wedding budget and how to create it and really breaking down that budget. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of all of the numbers and everything, I just want to preface this by saying what I'm going to talk about in this video are kind of the average costs and what you can expect to pay as like a starting point. So there's so many factors that are going to play into what your wedding budget is going to be, what you're going to pay for each vendor and different arenas of your wedding. So just keep that in mind as you're watching this video and know that every category, every kind of facet of your wedding might differ depending on what your priorities are and where you want to spend more money. So just know that the first step to creating your wedding budget is to really sit down and think through what your priorities might be, where you might be willing to spend more money in other places, and that might help you going through this video about where you might be able to add a little bit more money or different parts of your budget into one section and take away from another. So that being said, this video is going to throw a lot of numbers at you, so you might want to jot things down if you want to, but I also am going to link my budget spreadsheet in the description below where you can go ahead and download that for free, and that will list out very closely what I talk about in this video and kind of give you a starting point to create your own wedding budget. So in 2021, the average cost of a wedding in the United States was $28,000. Now, with me being in Montana, I also want to talk about kind of the costs that are standard here, as a lot of people watching this video might also be in Montana. And in 2021, the average cost of a wedding here in Montana was $18,500. So to kind of split the difference and for the sake of this video, to kind of have an overall number to utilize in this video, I'm gonna kind of go in the middle there and use the number of $25,000 of a wedding budget for the sake of this video. Again, the numbers that I'm going to say in this video are not necessarily what you should expect to pay, but how to break down this overall budget into sections and what you can allot yourself based on what your overall budget is. So let's start with the venue. On average, most couples will spend about 20 to 25% of their overall budget on the venue, sometimes upwards of even 30%, as the average cost of a venue in the US is about $10,000. Here in Montana, I would say most of my couples spend between $6,000 and $8,000 on a venue, and this number is really going to vary depending on what kind of venue you're booking, if it's all-inclusive, if it includes tables and chairs, if you have a venue coordinator included, the location. All of those sorts of things are really going to vary on the overall cost of your venue, so keep that in mind. If we're working with this $25,000 wedding budget, this would give you about $5,000 to $6,500 to budget towards your wedding venue. Moving on to catering. Again, this can vary depending on if you have your dessert and alcohol all included in your catering. Right now, I'm just going to kind of break these up individually. So just food catering, you can allot about 10 to 15% of your overall budget, and same numbers for your alcohol, 10 to 15%. So with a $25,000 budget, this would give you $2,500 to $3,750 for each your food catering and your alcohol catering. For a DJ, this is about 5 to 8% of your overall budget. So with this $25,000 max budget, you would allot $1,250 to $2,000 for your wedding DJ. Now, if you plan to opt for a live band, this number is going to be a little bit higher, and so you're probably going to want to pull from one of these other categories and something that may not be as high of a priority for you if you are wanting to have a live band at your wedding. If you plan to have a wedding planner, this again varies based on the tier of planning that you hire from this wedding planner, but with a $25,000 budget, if you allotted 5%, that would be about $1,250, which a standard day of coordinator is about $1,250 to $1,700. Your wedding dress will likely be about 5 to 8% of your overall budget, which would give you a range of $1,250 to $2,000 for your wedding dress. Transportation services, you can typically account for about 3% of your overall budget, which for this $25,000 budget, you would allot $750 to transportation. Dessert, again, this will vary if you're having a multiple tiered cake, if you're having a variety of desserts, but typically about 5% of your overall budget, which would be $1,250. Photographer and or videographer is about 12 to 15% of your overall budget, which would be $3,000 to $3,750. Flowers, now this is where it can really vary. You can spend as little as $1,000 on flowers, or you can spend easily about $10,000 on flowers. So really having some knowledge on what you want to really achieve with your wedding flowers and what types of flowers are in bloom, and these sorts of things are what you're going to really want to talk to your florist about when making these decisions. But ideally, you can budget about 8 to 10% of your overall budget, which for a $25,000 wedding budget would be $2,000 to $2,500. Stationery, you can allot about 2% of your overall budget, which would be $500. And your decor and rentals then would be anywhere from 12 to 20% of your overall budget. Now, this will be on the larger side if your venue does not include things like tables and chairs, as you will have to utilize a rental company to rent those items, and will be on the lower end if that is already included. So you can kind of scale both of those categories depending on where you need them in your wedding budget. With a $25,000 wedding budget, this would be about $3,000 to $5,000. You also want to make sure that you're setting aside some money for surprise costs. If things are costing more than they were initially booked, if you needed to add on things, if your guest count increases, things like your vendor tips, you want to have about 5% set aside for these surprise costs, which for a $25,000 wedding budget would be $1,250. Now, again, based on your priorities for your wedding, you can sit down and see how all of these numbers break down based on what your overall budget is and where your numbers sit in each category. This is when you can go in and know if you have higher priorities in one area, you can kind of slide that scale to account for a lot more money in that particular category and maybe take away from somewhere else. But it is incredibly important to sit down and set this budget before you make any decisions regarding your wedding. So before you book your venue, before you even have your guest list, sit down and 1, prioritize, and 2, go through these percentages, categorize your wedding budget, and figure out where you're kind of sitting number-wise in all of these categories. Seeing this list of numbers can also very largely influence some of the decisions that you do make. So if you're seeing exactly how much money you're able to spend in each category based on what your overall budget is, that's likely going to influence things like how many guests you invite, because so many of these categories are going to be highly dependent on the amount of guests you have. So if your numbers are really small on things like catering or rentals, those are going to be directly impacted by the amount of people that you invite to your wedding. So if you're cutting back on that guest count, you're going to be sitting in the lot smaller end of this budget range. I know wedding budgets isn't the most fun part of wedding planning, but it is essential in the beginning stages of wedding planning, and be sure that you sit down and really spend some time working through your wedding budget and categorize it using these percentages to kind of give you an idea and a base point of what you can expect to spend, so that you aren't just throwing your card around and not even knowing how much money you're spending and then realizing that you have no more money left and you haven't even booked your florist or your caterer. The idea is that if you set yourself up for success in the beginning, wedding planning will be a lot more enjoyable and a lot less stressful in the long run. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning, tips, and advice, and we'll see you next week.